Hello friends, welcome to Story Time. Today, we're taking a look at a psychological horror film released in 2017 called Get Out. The movie begins late at night in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. A young man named Andre is walking down the street, seemingly lost. He talks on the phone, joking about how creepy and overwhelmingly white the neighborhood feels. Suddenly, a mysterious white sports car begins following him at a slow pace. Sensing that something is wrong, he starts walking the other way. But when he looks back, the car has stopped. Before he can even react, a masked man jumps out, grabs Andre from behind, chokes him until he passes out, and throws him into the trunk. The car then drives away quietly into the night. The scene then shifts to a beautiful apartment in New York City, where we meet our main character, Chris Washington, a talented young photographer, and his girlfriend, Rose Armitage. The couple is preparing for a weekend trip to visit Rose's family. Chris then expresses his concern that Rose's parents might not be happy about him being black. Rose reassures him that her dad isn't racist at all and even makes a joke about it. The couple laughs it off and hits the road. As they continue their drive, Chris pulls out a cigarette, but Rose quickly snatches it from him and throws it out of the car, showing how much she cares about his health. A short while later, Chris calls his friend Rod, who works as a TSA officer at the airport. As soon as Rod learns about the trip, he strongly disapproves and warns Chris not to go. However, Chris brushes off his concerns and ends the call without giving it much thought. The couple then continues their journey, enjoying each other's company. But their peaceful drive takes a sudden turn when their car unexpectedly hits something on the road. Chris gets out of the car to see what they've hit. He discovers a deer lying on the roadside. As he watches the animal take its final breath, something deep inside him breaks. Soon, a police officer arrives at the scene. He checks the area and then demands to see Chris's ID, even though Rose says she was the one driving. Chris is ready to hand it over just to avoid trouble, but Rose refuses. She starts defending Chris and argues with the officer until he finally backs down. They finally arrive at the Armitage estate. There, they meet Rose's parents, Dean and Missy. Dean works as a neurosurgeon, and Missy is a psychiatrist. They welcome them warmly, and Dean immediately gives Chris a tour of the house. Chris then notices something unusual. The family has two black servants, Walter, the groundskeeper, and Georgina, the housekeeper. Dean notices the confused look on Chris's face and quickly explains that Walter and Georgina were hired to care for his parents before they passed away, and he couldn't bring himself to let them go. However, Chris can't shake the feeling that something is off. The way Walter and Georgina behave seems completely unnatural, almost as if they are robots. Their smiles are stiff, and their eyes look strangely empty. The family then spends some time together, and Dean asks Chris if he smokes, which Chris admits, adding that he's trying to quit. Dean then suggests undergoing a hypnosis treatment with Missy, claiming that he used to be addicted as well, but after the treatment, even the sight of a cigarette makes him want to vomit. Chris finds the suggestion a bit strange and politely declines. As they continue talking, Rose's brother, Jeremy, arrives and introduces himself to Chris. Later that evening, Rose and Chris sit down for dinner with her family. During the meal, Jeremy begins making strange remarks about Chris's physical strength and athletic build, suggesting that black people have superior genetic abilities. His comments make everyone visibly uncomfortable, but instead of stopping him, the family awkwardly brushes them off. As the conversation becomes increasingly disturbing, the dinner quickly turns into a tense and unsettling experience. That night, Chris couldn't sleep, so he went outside to smoke a cigarette. Suddenly, he saw Walter sprinting across the yard at full speed through the pitch-black darkness, heading straight toward him before turning away at the last second. Startled, Chris turned around and looked up at a window, where he saw Georgina silently staring down at him while brushing her hair. Terrified, Chris runs back inside. There, he bumps into Missy, Rose's mother, sitting in her office. She invites him to sit down and begins asking about his smoking habit. During their conversation, Chris opens up about the trauma of his mother's death and admits that the fact he couldn't do anything to help her still haunts him. As Missy repeatedly taps a silver spoon against a teacup, she starts asking Chris about the night his mother died. It is then that Chris realizes he can't move and has fallen under her hypnosis. Tears stream down his face as he finally confesses the truth. He sat at home watching TV, doing nothing while his mother lay dying on the street. Missy looks at him coldly for a second and whispers,
"Sink into the floor.
Wait.
Sink."
Instantly, Chris feels as though he is falling into a dark, endless void. Above him, his physical surroundings appear like a tiny, distant TV screen. He can see everything, but he can't move, speak, or scream as he becomes trapped in the sunken place. Moments later, Chris gasps and wakes up in bed, sweating and terrified, unsure whether what he experienced was real or just a dream. He notices a cigarette nearby and realizes that his urge to smoke is completely gone. As a sense of uneasiness washes over him, Chris grabs his camera and goes outside to get some fresh air. There, he meets Walter, who apologizes for scaring him the previous night and asks if he is okay. Walter also mentions that Chris spent a long time in Missy's office the night before, confirming that the whole experience was not a dream. The following afternoon, the house is filled with wealthy elderly people attending the annual Armitage family party. Chris is forced to mingle with them even though he doesn't want to. The guests begins making uncomfortable comments about Chris's body and treating him more like an object than a person. Feeling completely out of place, Chris tries to leave. But then, he spots another black man dressed in a classy suit. Relieved to find someone he can relate to, Chris walks over and says it's good to find a brother here. However, the man doesn't react like a normal young person at all. Instead, he behaves like a 70-year-old man trapped in a young man's body. He introduces himself as Logan. Before Chris can make sense of the strange encounter, a woman who appears to be Logan's partner arrives and leads him away, leaving Chris even more confused. Chris then calls his friend Rod and tells him about the strange things that happened to him the previous night and his encounter with Logan. Hearing all of this, Rod once again warns him to get out of there. But Chris thinks Rod is just being paranoid and hangs up the call. Chris walks back downstairs and finds Logan chatting with everyone. He then notices that he has seen Logan before and decides to take a picture to send to Rod. As Chris takes the photo, the flash hits Logan's eyes. Instantly, Logan's stiff smile drops. His eyes fill with pure panic, and blood starts to pour out of his nose. He rushes at Chris, grabs him by the jacket, and screams at him to get out. Jeremy suddenly comes in and pulls Logan away, easing the tension. Dean explains that it was a seizure triggered by an anxiety attack, but Chris struggles to believe him. While they talk, Logan comes out of Missy's office and apologizes to Chris for scaring him. Later, Rose takes Chris out for a walk so he can calm down. Chris expresses his uneasiness and says he wants to leave. Meanwhile, inside the house, Dean and the guests appear to be holding what looks like an auction, where Chris's photo is being shown and sold to a blind man named Jim Hudson. That night, Chris sends the photo of Logan he took earlier to Rod. Seeing the picture, Rod immediately calls Chris and tells him that the person in the photo is Andre, his old friend who went missing, not Logan. Before Chris can say anything, his phone dies. Realizing that something is wrong, Chris tells Rose to pack her things because they need to leave immediately. As Rose heads off to get ready, Chris notices a small closet door slightly open. Curious, he goes to investigate and finds a box filled with photographs. As he looks through them, he discovers pictures of Rose with different black partners. To his horror, there are also photos of her with Walter and Georgina. Chris connects the dots, and the realization hits him like a lightning bolt. Every black person in this house was brought here by Rose. They aren't servants, they're victims of something much bigger. Just then, Rose walks in. Thinking quickly, Chris acts as if nothing has happened and starts to leave. As he heads downstairs with Rose, Chris sees her entire family standing in the dark, silently watching him. Jeremy is blocking the front door. Sensing that something is terribly wrong, Chris asks Rose for the car keys. Rose fumbles through her bag, looking for the keys and claiming that she can't find them, while Jeremy slowly begins to corner him. As time passes, Chris loses his patience and screams at Rose for the keys. Suddenly, Rose's face goes completely blank, and a cold expression spreads across her features. She then holds up the car keys and calmly says,
"You know I can't give you the keys, right, babe?"
Before Chris can react, Missy taps her silver spoon against the teacup, causing his knees to buckle. Chris instantly falls back into the sunken place and collapses to the floor, completely paralyzed as the family stands over his helpless body. When Chris wakes up, he is strapped tightly to a leather armchair in a creepy basement. A retro TV turns on in front of him and plays an old video featuring Rose's grandfather. In it, he explains a medical procedure called the coagula and the horrifying truth behind it. Dean uses his skills as a brain surgeon to cut open a victim's head and transplant parts of the brain of an elderly, wealthy white person into a young black body. Missy's hypnosis is then used to suppress the victim's original consciousness, pushing it deep into the sunken place. The victim's soul remains trapped forever, forced to watch through their own eyes like a passenger in a car they can no longer drive. Unable to get in contact with Chris, Rod files a missing persons report. He then tells the police about Adrian and his theory that people are being brainwashed. However, the officers just laugh at him and don't take his story seriously. Meanwhile, Chris speaks with Jim Hudson, the blind man he met at the party. Jim reveals that he is the one undergoing the procedure and wants Chris's eyes so he can see and take photographs again. He also explains that black people are specifically chosen because the family believes they possess superior physical attributes. As the surgery is about to begin, Jeremy walks into the basement with a wheelchair to take Chris to the operating room. Chris looks as though he has given up, his head hanging low. However, the moment Jeremy unties him, Chris seizes the opportunity, grabs a heavy ball, and smashes it into Jeremy's head. Chris then reveals that he had secretly stuffed cotton from the leather chair into his ears, allowing him to block out the sound of Missy's teacup and avoid falling under her hypnosis. Chris then sneaks upstairs and finds Dean in the operating room. Without hesitation, he stabs him in the throat with the sharp antlers of a deer statue. As Dean collapses, he knocks over a candle, accidentally setting the house on fire. Chris then runs into Missy in the hallway and quickly knocks down her teacup before she can use it against him. Enraged, Missy attacks him with a knife, but Chris manages to overpower and kill her. Meanwhile, Jeremy, who has regained consciousness, tries to stop Chris at the front door. However, Chris fights him off and finally makes his way outside. Chris grabs Jeremy's car keys and drives away down the dark driveway. Suddenly, he hits someone. Looking in the rearview mirror, Chris realizes it's Georgina. Remembering how his mother died alone on the side of the road, he can't bring himself to leave her behind. He picks Georgina up and places her in the passenger seat. As Chris continues driving, Georgina suddenly wakes up. That's when he realizes that she is actually Rose's grandmother living as Georgina. Furious that Chris has ruined her family, she starts screaming and attacks him. The struggle causes the car to crash into a tree, killing Georgina. Chris crawls out of the car and starts running for his life. Rose chases after him with a hunting rifle, while Walter runs right beside her. That's when Rose calls Walter Grandpa, revealing that Walter is actually her grandfather. Walter quickly catches up to Chris and tackles him to the ground. As Walter pins him down, Chris remembers the effect of the flash. He quickly pulls out his phone and shines the camera light directly into Walter's eyes. The flash causes the grandfather's consciousness to slip, allowing the real Walter to wake up for a few seconds. Walter then tells Rose that he can finish Chris off and asks her to hand him the rifle. As soon as Rose hands him the gun, he turns around and shoots her right in the stomach. Then, unable to live with what has been done to his body, Walter turns the gun on himself and pulls the trigger. As Rose lies bleeding on the ground, Chris, furious and hurt by her ultimate betrayal, wraps his hands around her neck and tries to kill her. However, he couldn't bring himself to do it and eventually lets go. Suddenly, the sound of a siren echoes in the distance as a vehicle pulls up. Using the last of her strength, Rose begins calling for help, while Chris raises his hands and prepares for the worst. The car door opens, and to Chris's relief, it's Rod, his best friend. Chris quickly gets into Rod's car, and the two drive off into the night, leaving Rose alone on the cold road. And that marks the end of the movie. Thank you for watching.